So I wanted to talk a little bit about how to make conversation. Now, why is this in this section? Why are we talking about it? Well, primarily because disclosure or communication or having conversations. Hello, Coda. Let's go over there. Thank you. Um, these are the ways that we often move through those big three sections of acquaintances, friends, and intimates. Okay, that's kind of the conversation and self-disclosure and having these talks are how we do that. And so when I talk about making conversation, I'm not really talking about the stuff that we talk about with our close friends or our intimates, because that's something that at that point in the relationship, we're so comfortable with, we don't have to worry about it, right? What I'm talking about instead is these new conversations, these conversations with acquaintances or with new work friends. So maybe you're either attending a conference or you're in a brand new class for the semester or you're new at a job. How do you make conversation? And as someone who's a little bit more on the introverted side, I can tell you that this is something that I've always struggled with. I'm one of these people that's like, unless I'm talking with people who share my interests and I know that they like those interests, I always worry about setting my geekiness level, for example, and what you talk about. And as a result, sometimes I know personally I tend to ramble, or I end up, or completely withdrawing and not saying anything at all. So these are some guidelines I think I find useful, and I hope they're useful for you too. So the first one is to take your turn, right? Take your turn when speaking. Now, if you are someone who tends to be a bit of a rambler when you get nervous, because a lot of times there's some communication anxiety with all of this, if you're a little bit more of a rambler, well then, make sure that you are talking about as much as everyone else. That's a really good kind of rule to follow. Likewise, if you're more of an introvert, make sure that you are occasionally taking a turn. Because if not, then being in this conversation really isn't doing you any good. You want to meet people or build relationships. That's the whole purpose of doing some of these things, right? And so otherwise you're wasting your time. And so one of the ways that if you're an introvert that you can take your turn is to ask an elaborating question. Let's say someone's telling you about, let's say you're in a brand new class and you say, "Oh, have you had this teacher before?" And they go, "Oh my God, yes, she's a nutball, blah, blah, blah." And you might say, "Oh, well, how did you do last time?" That is a good question. That's a good way to take your turn, make your mark, be memorable, but still kind of stay safe and not have to come up with things to say, because I know I struggle with that. You also want to be careful not to over disclose. Sometimes when we're nervous, we tend to ramble, and we might give away details of ourselves that we really shouldn't. So always be thinking about what are some things that I don't want to over disclose. Now, most of us know that we wouldn't walk up to a new person and go, "Hi, I'm Lisa, I'm a recovering alcoholic. How are you?" Unless we're at an AA meeting or something like that, that wouldn't make any sense. But I also want you to be careful with disclosure at work, because you never know when someone might be promoted above you or when you might be promoted above them. And sometimes over disclosure can come back to bite you. For example, let's say you are someone who occasionally imbibes an illegal substance on a recreational basis, and you've told a work friend about that. Well, then let's say they get promoted and they've been told by corporate to do drug testing. Well, now you've put them in a really difficult position. Do they drug test you, knowing that they're probably going to get a positive result and maybe get you fired? Or do they not test you and run the risk of having other people at work say, "Oh, well, so-and-so and so-and-so are friends, and so that's why she didn't get picked." So again, just be careful with work friends. They might come off, because we spend so much of our time with them, as people that we know that we can confide in, but there are some additional things to think about. Just be aware. Don't be afraid, but be aware of what you're doing. Okay. Also, keep your disclosure even and gradual, right? I think I just mentioned that, you wouldn't just, come in and tell somebody all about your personal life. That wouldn't be okay. I also think it's always good to be other-centered. You do not need, and I think that this happens a lot when we're in new conversations in new places, especially in places where we feel like we need to prove ourselves. We need to prove that we're worth being there, that we should be there, that we need to be, that we're smart and capable. And so sometimes you feel like you have to jump into a conversation, and it's really easy to then monopolize that conversation by focusing on you proving yourself. And I don't think it often comes from a place of wanting to be the center of attention. It's wanting to be worthy to be in the conversation. And it's always good to take a step back and say, wait a second, I already know what I can do. They'll figure it out. Why don't I stay other-centered? Because people are going to remember the person who was interested in them. We are all the heroes of our own story. And so if you can get someone talking about themselves, a lot of times you're doing a really, people are going to see that as a good person. And this is especially wonderful for my introverted friends who struggle to know what to say. Because if you just ask somebody, oh, tell me about how you got into that, or why do you like that? It's a really good way of being other-centered. All right. So always do that self-monitoring thing. That's always a good thing. When you're trying to engage in small talk or, kind of that acquaintance talk, I'm a big fan of finding safe openers. Some of those safe openers might be to asking somebody about an artifact. Remember we talked about this in the nonverbal chapter. An artifact might be, a necklace or a bracelet. And I'm a big fan. I have a tendency to pick the ones that people mess with because it usually has some sort of meaning to them. And so, for example, let's say you saw me messing with my bracelet and you could say, oh, where'd you get your bracelet? And you'll almost always see they'll touch it. Oh, this? And then they'll say, oh, I got it from, I got it from Zox. It's a cute little band and my daughter has one that matches it. Well, now if you're an introvert, this is awesome because you're just like, great, I don't have to come up with anything to say. If someone asks you about something, it's always nice to then toss the ball back. You say, oh, thank you for asking. That was so kind of you, and then maybe you might tell the story and then you might return with some sort of honest compliment. All right. An honest compliment is always a good way of getting a conversation. If it's honest, it has to be sincere or people will be able to sense it. All right. People can sense those a mile away. And so my guidelines for a good compliment, they have to really be a compliment. It has to be something you believe. And then 2, it needs to be something that they can completely control. So for example, it would be okay to say, like, let's say someone got their hair dyed bright orange. If you like it, you might say, oh, I really like your hair. If someone has recently lost a bunch of weight, I don't think it's good to compliment because you don't know why that person lost that weight. And it could open you up for some difficult conversation, right? And then this stage in a relationship, we want easy conversation. You can talk about current events. Normally, the rule of thumb is to avoid politics and religion, unless you're at a conference about that. And I'm a big fan of taking my cue from what other people are talking about or from thinking about, like, what did we just hear? So a lot of times, if I'm talking about, if I'm at a conference, I might say, so what did you think of the keynote speaker? Or if I'm at a happy hour for small business owners, I might say, oh, so are you a business owner? And then let them talk about that. One thing that we all have is this collective experience of how are you holding up? And I really hear that a lot right now with people when I'm dealing with conversation. No matter what you do, keep your conversation relevant. In other words, what is currently going on around you? And then be responsive, always keep that reciprocity where, you're kind of keeping it even and gradual. The one thing you want to try to avoid is this one-upsmanship or the you think that's bad kind of thing. And this is a tendency to be in a lot of cases, and I know this is a stereotype, in stereotypically feminine conversations where people will share horror stories. And I think that a lot of people think it's a bonding thing, but sometimes it can feel like you're trying to one-up each other. And that can actually be a negative if you're trying to build good relationships. So other-centered, stay focused on that, on people, be interested in their stories, keep it relevant and reciprocal, and you'll be golden. All right, I hope that's helpful. See you in the next video.